Hello everyone. I'm going to speak English today. I hope this is not a big issue for anybody. There are two reasons for that. One is I never know who comes to talks like this, and occasionally in hackerspace there are people who English might be easier for them. And second reason is my knowledge is mostly in English. So it's a cheat. I can say that I want to be inclusive, but actually no, it's easier for me. So yeah. So thank you organizers for inviting me. And yeah, this presentation will be mostly a primer about fonts, about the subject of fonts. We'll not cover everything, but I will try to look at some important topics in terms of technology, in terms of language support, in terms of rendering, in terms of why should we care about fonts, what is the history, and yeah, we'll look into that. And hopefully it will be useful in some way for you as game designers or visual artists. Yeah, we'll see. That's an experiment. So a little bit about me. You might know me from things in hackerspace like Future of Work, from designing identity for Festival Światła, 3D 3M Festival, the 3D printing for, I worked with Isaac, maybe some of you know Kuba, who I designed the visual identity for them. And the led on here, I hope helped with a little bit with designing it and building the workshops around this. So I'm sort of not really a member of Hackerspace, but very close to a community for like 5 years. And I will not talk too much about myself and my work, but my second thing is I'm a type designer, and I design typefaces not only in Latin, but in really any language you can imagine. Well, maybe that's too much, but yeah, a little bit of Arabic, Cyrillic, Greek. I did a little bit of Bengali, but yeah. And for the purpose of this talk, I had some experiences with game dev. I'm not really working very closely with game dev too often, but I designed some microtransactions for World of Tanks. So this is like inscriptions that were present on tanks during some season. There were 7 sets of Latin and Cyrillic. This is not font, this is more lettering. So those are drawn, not really done as a vector. And I worked with Electronic Arts on the new rebranding for their FIFA game. I think it's called FC Sports. The typeface is called FC Sports. But yeah, I worked on a typeface with a large studio. I was just a cog in the machine. I wasn't really the sole designer. I was just a little part of it. But this is what I worked on the sans serif version of the font. And this is usually what people think of when they think of fonts, like, oh yeah, you have like some letters and a little bit of numbers, and yeah, that's cool. But this is very, very small subset, like set of letters. And the reality looks more like this. And this is a very small screenshot of the whole character set of one version of a typeface. So the typeface had italics, had sans serif, had serif version of a typeface, had weights, had widths, had support for different languages. This is a work not for a single person. This is a work for a whole studio or for a whole bunch of designers. The number of glyphs goes into thousands, couple of thousands, really. And yeah, it's a huge thing. So I worked on Latin. I didn't work on things like Arabic for this project. It was Shakhayer Bovat, Iranian type designer. Yeah, but I can say a little bit about it. So let's start with a very basic question, like very, very basic question. What is a font? Any ideas? Anybody has like an answer? What is a font? No? Okay, tough crowd. So a font, I like this definition. Font is a delivery mechanism for what we call a typeface will be relevant later when we'll be talking about like licenses, etc. And the definition of delivery mechanism is very neat because like it can be a metal typeface, like a metal font, which that was what it was back in the day. It can be a file on a computer. This is a delivery mechanism for producing a font. And yeah, this is a very useful definition. And it can be digital. It doesn't have to be. So yeah, what is not a font? Sorry, my slides are not in order. That is going to be fun and challenging. But yeah, what is not a font? And this is also pretty relevant for our discussion. Font is really, yeah, no, that was not in order. Anything else. So anything else is not a font. But not a font specifically for our purposes is also not like a lettering. Lettering is not a font. A logotype is not a font. Something that is already printed, it's not a font, it's a typeface. It's not a delivery mechanism. This is the important part. No worries. Hey. And calligraphy is definitely not a font. This is a manual art. So yeah, typeface is an idea. It's idea of a letter. This is like, for example, a drawing, an idea in a head, but a font is a delivery mechanism. It can be even a potato stamp. So yeah, potato stamp is really fits this definition pretty well. Yeah. And but usually nowadays we think of fonts as a digital files and something that's really a file. And so how did we get here? A little small primer on history of fonts. It's impossible to discuss everything in 45 minutes, but I'll touch on the key points that will be relevant later to discussion about licenses or about language support. So first of all, when we think of font, we in the West we think of like Gutenberg, which is 15th century, but actually the history of fonts goes back much earlier. It goes to China and to Tibet in 8th century. This is probably the first thing we can call a font, really, but it's discussable. Those were like wooden blocks that were carved, but could be reused for printing books and for printing religious texts. In China, we have a first proper movable typeface. Movable means in this case that you could take a block and arrange it in something else. It wasn't like a whole page that was carved. It was a single character that you can put on a press and print into something else and reuse it. And yeah, in the West, we mostly think of Gutenberg and metal typeface. Yeah, but typefaces changed a couple of times. So later during the 18th century, well, more like 19th century, we had invention of monotype machine with the industrialization. Monotype and linotypes, which were really the first proper automation system for typefaces, for production of fonts. So how it worked is you had this huge machine and you had a keyboard, which was very close to what we use today. I mean, it was larger and had some special characters. But basically, you were typing, for example, a newspaper, just as you were typing a Word document. And the machine would spill out single characters, but they were already set. You didn't have to manually set them on like manually set them to print them. The machine would do typesetting automatically. And the fonts, so the actual delivery mechanism, evolved. So here we have a matrix. So the first picture is the matrix, which was inside the monotype machine. And this was a block which was used basically as a basically like you were pouring metal into specific letter, like the machine would pour metal there, and the like proper letter would come out of it. This guy is probably the last living person who still does the matrices. If he dies, I don't know what happens really to like the whole museums that still use monotype machines or linotypes. Yeah, I had pleasure to meet him in London once. So yeah, and later the delivery mechanism changed again into phototype setting. So now we had a light going through a matrix again. So you can see the object, which is actually like a font, is similar to the previous one. But basically how the phototype setting machines would work, you would have a matrix and like photo reactive paper, and you would shine light into each letter that you want to print. The machine would obviously move the matrix, so it would choose the correct letter. And we are here starting to see a little bit later. It wasn't immediately looking like this, but very very familiar to us. Machines like close to computers. Later, it were computers to typesetting. You were using software similar to InDesign, like very obviously very rudimentary and very basic, but it was a typesetting software. And yeah, here we have the first actual digital typeface. What digital meant in this is a half grotesque. What digital in this meant, it was that the typeface was actually a file, and you were having a CRT screen which was shining on the photo paper. So so you didn't really had a specific specific matrix. It wasn't a physical object. It was actually a set of instructions for a computer to what to display on the screen to transfer it onto the paper. What is this picture? Anybody?
Not a photo.
No, not a photo. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, Icarus. So the next, big thing in fonts, this is in my opinion one of the more important ones, is Icarus. This is called Icarus, the system, which was used to digitize typefaces into vectors, and this is what we now more think of as a font, like a vector file traditionally. So how it worked? This is a Peter Karov. This is the inventor, who I learned recently was born in Stargard, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so we had machines like this, and how we would use it is probably you don't see it very well, but there's a small like a stylus thing. It's like a glass ball with a pointer inside, and you would have a drawing of a letter that you needed to prepare previously. And you would go line by line and point on the letter and slowly draw over the letter. And you had to be very, very precise with each letter. You couldn't really edit the curves later, so you couldn't really correct anything. It was very difficult. You had to be very precise when actually digitizing the typeface, step by step. And we came from letters as design, so as we think of it, to pixels, to run length encoding, which is the DigiGrotesque Helm machine, and to vector encoding, finally. This is more what we think of typefaces right now. So this is, do you know why most people came to Xerox PARC? You probably know Xerox PARC, like the place where modern GUI was invented, where the invention of mouse was pretty much invented and later adopted by Apple. So most people, when they came to work for Xerox PARC, the answer why did you came here was actually because of this machine, and it is a laser printer, and this was very exciting. This was this was a very exciting technology for a time, and later because of this machine, people who worked on it formed a little small company called Adobe, and they invented a language that was basically originally invented to describe layout on a page, a PostScript language, and it allowed for encoding fonts as vector files and editing them. But it quickly went very bad because Adobe was charging people very much for licenses. And I don't know if history repeats itself. Nowadays, I think Adobe is charging a little bit too much for my software. Yeah, so a small startup, very obscure, called Apple spotted PostScript, and they really wanted it in their machines. And later Microsoft was also like, oh yeah, we probably, if we want to have good fonts and good layouts, we probably want to use it as well. And Adobe was swimming in cash and really charged quite a lot for it. So what happened, Microsoft and Apple teamed up to invent a new standard called TrueType. And it was basically a competition for a PostScript. And it forced both of companies to make it pretty much free. So you don't really need to pay anything to now, like have a computer, anything extra to have a computer with nice fonts. Pretty much everybody can have them. Yeah, so what are fonts now, if not a potato stamp? Fonts are software. There's a big asterisk there because of USA law, but I'm going to go back to that. So at some point, like, group of people agreed on a one standard, and this is what we have now. It's OpenType font, and it basically is like a package wrapper, and you can have inside a OTF, a TrueType, a PostScript font, whatever you really want inside. So if you see something that is a TrueType font, for example, this is still an OTF font. If you see OTF font, it's probably a PostScript font. I'm going to explain later what specifically the differences are. Don't worry about it. But if you see a web font, for example, this is also an OTF font. Yeah, and OTF is really a package that stores many things like kerning tables, color palette tables, if you have a color font. If you have PostScript or TrueType glyphs, it can store those. Hinting instructions, interpolation tables, everything is going to be explained later, don't worry. SVG tables, OTF features like small caps. It's basically a bunch of tables. This is what font is. Yeah, and what's the difference between those TrueType and PostScript? So really the one major difference is how they describe curves. So one is quadratic and one is cubic. For our purposes, what we really need to know is just they kind of look differently. They require different amount of curve points, so the points that actually control how the Bezier curve behaves, so how curved it is. So for TrueType, it's just 1 point between two. And for the PostScript, what you probably know if you use Adobe products, so if you ever opened Illustrator or anything like this, this is what you see usually, the 2 control points for a curve. And the other major difference, sorry, I'm going to scroll a little bit in my notes because I'm talking a lot and I need to actually, read a little bit. Yeah. And the other difference is hinting. So the other big difference between those two formats is hinting. And what hinting is. So if you have a vector file, something needs to render it. And there are different ways it can really interpret vector files. Like, so for example, your printer might interpret it a little bit different. Your screen might interpret it a little bit different. Unreal Engine might interpret it a little bit different, and Photoshop. So when you have this kind of amount of complexity, something like hinting helps. This is basically a way for a font designer to tell software, hey, if you have a 18-point typeface, maybe the pixel shouldn't really be like the weight of the bar shouldn't really be 2 pixels. It should be 1 pixel. So to keep a consistency, to don't really have some really ugly ink spots or anything. And hinting, you can specify for each size basically. So I can specify a hinting for 18 points, for 21, for 24 points. And this is really helpful for displaying things. The difference between TrueType fonts and for PostScript fonts is for PostScript fonts, I can only specify hinting on tops and bottoms. So I can only say, oh, actually the height of the letter is this, and don't really put any pixels on top of it. For TrueType, I can do whatever I want. It's a little bit more complicated format. So this is pretty useful when you're designing things like for web, for games probably. We'll talk about games a little bit later. So traditionally, TrueType fonts are considered a bit better for screen, but it's huge simplification. Yeah. It also depends if a designer actually used auto-hinter or hinted the font himself. So yeah, what can happen if you don't have a right hinting for a font? Things like this. So here we have a bar that really disappeared in the middle, and like the leg of an R is barely visible when you scale it up. Or you can have things like this where the letter is barely visible and it's basically a black ink spot if you have a lower resolution screen. And why does it matter still? Like, we have Apple displays. Apple basically ignores hinting. It just says, we have such a great screens, it's such a great resolution, we don't care about it. So why am I talking about it? Because things like this, so Nintendo, the resolution is about 480p. This is a very small screen. The pixels are still visible. You need to actually probably use a font that supports hinting well enough, especially if you're using it on lower resolution screens. And things like, I'm not exactly sure what's Steam Deck's resolution. I think it's 720p, but you can, yeah, is it? Okay, that's pretty small for a like larger OLED display. So I would imagine you can get some ugly text if you're using wrong fonts and fonts that don't really support hinting, for example. I'm talking too fast, excuse me. Yeah. I'm going to flood you a lot with technicalities. That's what memes are for, to kind of cheer the mood a little bit. Yeah. So variations. Who knows the term interpolation? Okay. Can you more or less say what it is, just with your own words?
It's basically guessing what the point would be between two other points.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a good description. So it's not a concept from fonts necessarily, but it's used in font design and in working with fonts quite a lot. Basically, if you have two shapes, vector shapes are very easy for that, and you have two points, you can calculate the middle ground, or like where it should be in the middle. And it's very useful because if you have a like very light shape and very bold shape, you can easily calculate the middle point. So you don't really have to design everything. If you have a family that has, for example, 7, 8, 20 styles, you can, for example, if you just want to design a light, from light to a black version, you can just design a light and a black. And that's okay. Like, everything in the between can be calculated. Of course, there are some asterisks to that. You have to do some corrections, etc. But this simplifies work quite a bit. And yeah, and this leads us to another thing, which is variable fonts. So at some point, a guy from Warsaw, basically from Tychy, sorry, he was from Tychy, basically dug up an old Apple format that supported a thing called variable fonts, which is now a standard everywhere. And more or less with few asterisks again, but it's supported for most of the browsers. And it's really neat because you can do interpolation inside the file. So you don't really need to have, for example, 20 files for each style. You can have just one file, which is a name of the typeface, and it can be it can have all the styles you can imagine inside this one file, and you do not have to transition between them by step by step. So you don't need to choose a light, a black, or a regular, a medium, whatever. You can go from 0 to 1000 like with a slider, and it's all really smooth and really nice. You can do very neat things with it. I'm going to go to my first demo. There are going to be some demos in this presentation. Axis praxis. Okay, yeah, this is useful. So, for example, for this typeface, we have a weight axis. So, as I was saying, it can go from pretty light to pretty bold. And it can do so nicely, very easily. And you don't have to actually choose a specific instance of it. So I can say, for example, oh, I want bold italic, and it's going to change like a traditional font. But I can also just use a slider and have all the gradation I want in the world. Yeah. And as I said, interpolation is really fun, and it doesn't have to go like be used only for boring things. It can also animate a horse. I don't know if you see it well. Going to yeah, the axis can be really anything. It can be a time, for example, which is going to be probably useful later. Okay, where's my presentation? Can I see it? Nice. Oh yeah, and you can also animate stuff. Ooh, that's nice. So this is a sample like I did for one of my typefaces, and it goes from like bold to light, from serif version to sans serif version. Yeah, it should be. I'm not going to stop on it too much, but yeah, just a nice sample to understand what variables are in fonts. Yeah, and right. Okay, so we know already what fonts are, more or less. What's a little bit of history behind them. I want to focus now a little bit on how fonts should look. So yeah, that's a nice thing. That's what we designers like. We like for things to look nice, to work properly, to just be shiny, etc. And should they look like this? No? Okay. So what's the problem here? Anybody?
Few of them.
Yeah. Okay. A few of them. So obviously this is a very much exaggerated, and this example is to illustrate one thing. We have a very fixed idea of what fonts should look like. We have in our heads, we have expectations for what fonts should be like. And sometimes either the rendering system or the file itself doesn't deliver on those expectations. So it can be a problem with the font, but it can also be a problem with the actual software. And this is very extreme for us, but this is a reality that some people encounter daily. And it's because of that. We usually think of fonts here in our small clique of West world as sure, we are just thinking in Latin. Our problems as people like here in Poland, mostly is, our typeface doesn't have ogonek or doesn't have the dot on Z, right? So, or something like this. And okay, that's quite a problem, and fonts got better in that most of the time. They now support this. But for some scripts, it's much harder, and there are many more problems. So here we have Arabic that doesn't connect, Bengali that has accents in the wrong place, or like Kannada that I don't even know what's going on here. It's just wrong. It's very ugly, and like the previous example, like really, this is how it looks to some people who actually use these languages. And that's because of him. Like basically when we think of technology and we see where technology came from for font design, it came from West. So it's thinking in in rectangles, and some scripts just don't fit into that definition. So in terms of fonts, you can usually, like on a major site, see for example, languages supported. The list doesn't tell you everything. doesn't tell you all the story, because, for example, we can have German language support, but for example, S can be very ugly, so it doesn't tell you the whole story, but can be pretty useful. But the one thing I wanted to also mention, to be aware of, is that script is not a language. The same thing, the same way as Polish is not a script. Like Latin is the script, but we don't say usually, oh, this Portuguese is written with English. So this is there's a difference there. You can have a Latin typeface that doesn't support Polish, and you can have Arabic typeface that doesn't support Urdu, for example. This happens quite a lot, actually. And I wanted to show one tool for you guys to see in terms of language support. This is Hyperglot. I think it's open source by Rosetta Type Foundry. And a bunch of people, basically, usually language speakers, can say what language supports and what glyphs are necessary for language to be supported. And yeah, we can see, for example, Iranian Persian in the Arabic script, what kind of glyphs needs to be present to actually for it to be supported. And we can also use a font checker to drop a script font here and to check, yeah, what does it support, really. Yeah, hope that's quite useful. But yeah, and font rendering, fonts showing up on screen, it's pretty complicated stuff. It depends on many things. Obviously, there's a design, there's a creation, there's Q&A building, but there's also a renderer part, so the technology. This is probably very relevant for you guys who actually work on with game engines and technical side. There's a shaping renderer, which basically connects the script, for example, or decides which diacritic should be where for each glyph. There's a layout engine which says, for example, okay, I will put this script to the right. It's a script that is read from right to left, not from left to right, for example. And there's a rasterizer, which we talked a little bit about. And to highlight how big of a problem this is and how I see it, this is from EU5 forum. There's a question of a guy who says, it's from 2015. That's not too long ago. I don't know. But for me, it's not too long ago. So I want to use Arabic text for things like many, blah, 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 blah. Here's an example. I tried different bunch of things and he couldn't get it to work. Yeah. The answer was, I'm sorry to say, the engine isn't currently capable of rendering Arabic. The main issue stems from blah, blah, blah. Basically, no, it's not possible. Will you add the pass in any update soon? Anyways, thanks for the reply. No, unfortunately, it's a lot of work which we don't currently have on our schedule. And this baffles me because Arabic is 906 million people. It's I don't know. Well, anyway. So yeah, almost a billion of people cannot use our tool for some reason. And yeah, in 2019, we added a support for Arabic. This is a huge news. I mean, great. Applause, I guess. So this is for Fortnite, but it was also for Unreal Engine 5. And yeah, why it was added? Of course, yeah, sure. No, it wasn't because of Epic. It was because of an effort of some guy from Iran that works in Google, who did a whole font shaping engine by himself and with help of a few other people. It's called Harvbaz. It's now being supported in most of the tools, but I'm pretty sure not in every game engine. And there are some places where it's not used. I want to show you just one page about Harvbaz. Okay. So some of the images you have already seen from here. This is a really nice document, State of Text Rendering in 2024. It's very detailed. I'm not going to go over everything. He describes the whole history of how we did get here in terms of font rendering, but also, this is a really nice one. You probably know it. This is basically Harvbaz and some previous Arabic rendering technologies and other scripts. Yeah, so if we do Command F, because he's usually game engines. Cool. So that's not a priority, but you can see like game engines, Godot game engine. Okay, works but not all. Works but not all. Unity to do. Like we just don't support it, and those are the major ones. If you use anything else like RPG Maker or anything, like forget about it basically. And I think you have to think about those kind of stuff if you want to release internationally immediately. This is quite important. Yeah, back to my presentation. I'm going to try to speed up because the time is of the essence. Optical sizes. Okay, so if you want a font to look good, you can also implement optical access. And optical access is really interesting because this is something that we lost during the transition of going from physical medium to digital or physical font when they were like block objects. Each font was actually in different size. Like if you wanted a different size, you actually needed a different physical size object. And when people were actually carving the fonts, they were already adjusting for it, like visually. Okay, so if it's larger, I probably need a lower contrast. And during the transition period to digital, we just basically lost it. We just said, okay, I want to do less work. And that's nice, but not really. But now with variable fonts, we can adjust fonts for size. And it might not seem like a lot, but when if you have a UI element and you are reading a lot of small text, having a little bit of more contrast, having wider letters, this adds up and your eyes get less tired. Sorry, this is a pretty poor quality screen. I'm not going to be able to show all of it. Yeah, my presentation. Dark mode access, you can also, I'm going to speed up a little bit, but yeah, dark mode access, you can also have access, for example, to control the font on a dark screen. So it can look a little bit different on a dark screen and a little bit different on a in white mode. So it should be more readable that way. And yeah, this all matters because things like this happen. This is Quest. I don't know if any of you tried VR, but I tried recently. I bought a Quest. It's horrible in terms of text rendering. It's a huge mess. Basically, how I understand it is there's no continuous rasterization, and there's no, basically, if you change like how far away the object is, the text doesn't get re-rendered. So it just renders it once, very blurry text. This is how I see it. This is not like because of the screen. This is like really bad. And it's pixelated. It's not really great. And one of the big problems with VR is obviously the screen stack and the technology. Like the screens are not there yet in terms of resolution. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try to close up, to zoom. Too fast. Can I go back? Yeah. So the Quest screen especially is very strange. It's basically not aligned, not leveled. Each screen is a little bit tilted. So you can see the pixel grid is actually like cross-hatched. It's not straight. And if you think about fonts, you think about straight stems, like, okay, those kind of shapes. So this is a little bit tricky. Can I? Okay. Yeah. So this is what especially like text, like in a long distance, looks for me. It's blurry because of resolution. That's fine. Like we can fix everything. But it's also like there's a grid. You can, if you have white text, you can clearly see grid. And if you don't think about this kind of stuff, like we are used to now, okay, we design in dark mode because we like dark mode, it's nice, it's cool, etc. But it was basically invented for a specific technology in mind. So for a like flat screen in VR, if you have like if you see a pixel grid with your letters, it's probably better to actually use traditional black letter on a white background. The white background, if it has a little bit of grid, doesn't matter that much. But if it's on a text, it really disrupts the quality of the text. So yeah, think about this, and also make your letters a little bit bolder than you're used to for VR. And yeah, so far we've been talking about this part of the ideas about letters. So this is a very nice like letter cloud, which represents fonts. Like sorry, I'll just try again. The idea is about fonts that if a font is close to the center, it's more readable, and thus it's more familiar and more similar to everything. So thus far we were talking about the center of this cloud, about the like very, very close to the center. But if we go outside, there's a whole world of fancy letters, like nice looking, not very readable usually, but we use it also. And for that we can also use see some variable examples to show you what's possible nowadays. So you remember variable axis and variable fonts. I'm going to show some nice examples of what you can do with variable fonts. You don't have to think about them in terms of just weight, optical sizes, and those all useful stuff. You can be also fun. This rotor typeface interpolates on like a rotation axis. That's really nice. I don't know where you would use it necessarily, but for some display, for some nice effect, cool, right? Radius, this is by Radek Łukasiewicz, really like this font. This interpolates, this basically adjusts to curves, so you can have a text on a curve that's really nice. It has like a axis that controls perspective. So if I change it a little bit, so it changes the perspective basically. That's cool. And we can have color fonts nowadays. That is okay, yeah, boring. But they can be also variable. What? So yeah, it can be Optimus Prime or something. And that's really nice. Obviously, you have to check compatibility. It's not going to be available everywhere, but it's nice to think of fonts like as something more. I don't know how are we with time. I didn't see your like. Okay. I just need to check how fast I need to talk. Cool. So yeah, those two fonts. Where to get fonts? So they're nice. They have nice history. They have nice shapes. They are useful. So yeah, I want to buy a font. Well, there are three main options, and Google Fonts, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. There are retail vendors. You can get fonts via subscriptions, and you can go get them via commission. So you can hire somebody, me maybe, to design a whole family for you or something like this. And yeah, retail can be directly from a foundry or from font marketplace. This differs a little bit because if you buy it directly from a foundry, you're supporting actually a foundry. Please do buy directly from a foundry. Don't use stuff like my fonts if you can. So yeah, supports designers directly, supports most license use cases. So I will talk about licenses a bit later. Can be exclusive. Can be an issue if you really want for something to be very unique. For your font to, for example, like a Diablo font, like designed by Emigre. It's not exclusive. You can actually use it in your games if you want, and like it's going to be looking like Diablo, but then it's less unique. Yeah. So exclusivity is nice. You're stuck with language support that is already there, but you can reach out to a person. And usually font designers, if they have a nice client or if you're willing to splash a little bit of money on them, they can add a language support. Subscription, cheap. So you just pay monthly, for example, for Adobe fonts or something. There are huge asterisks to that, but you have access to a huge library. So you can immediately do check 20 fonts or hundreds of fonts. 20 is very small. But yeah, and it's great for testing. If you want to just see how the font would look like in your project, that's probably the way to go. But it does not support all the use cases for licenses, and you might need to buy the font in the end anyway from a vendor. Yeah, or you can commission it. You can pay somebody to do it. It's usually expensive, but there's also an asterisk to that, because it might end up being much cheaper than paying, for example, yearly for app license, for web font license, for all bunch of licenses. If you have a big project or you just want to design a small typeface for display that is going to be only used in headings, it's probably a good way to go. The commission is actually cheaper. Solves technical limitations if somebody knows how to do it. Exclusive, can be built with specific language support in mind. And yeah, pays once and forget, usually. And Google Fonts, good luck getting a support from somebody who did something for free. That's my take on it. It can be done, it can be, yeah, but okay. But I don't want to say too much bad things about Google Fonts. I use it all the time as well. It's nice. Probably don't use any other free font sites, because you never know where the license came from. With few exceptions, maybe Font Squirrel. And if it's actually free or if it's stolen, because a lawyer can knock on your door. So I just buy it. Licenses. Not so fast. Fonts are software, a very strange kind of software. Easy to copy. You can just Command C and Command V it. Yeah, Command C, Command V. Can be protected with rights management software. It's just not how they work in operation systems. And without obvious install button. And as if they are software, it makes me a software engineer. That's nice. There are different types of licenses. I'm going to speed up a little bit, but depending on your use cases, you can see something like this. It can depend on if it's a desktop, web font, app, electronic doc, digital, and email. And the price will vary greatly depending on the amount of users, amount of people who will see your typeface, and things like this. This price is very flexible. It can be as low as $30 and as high as $1,000, for example, or more for one style. But from vendor to vendor, things might vary. They may have very different licenses, and you have to research that, what the license actually covers. I'm just checking the time, because I will go to... Okay, I'm already past the time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. And they can be very different. They can just say student, freelance, startup. What's inside the licenses? Nobody knows. You have to read those, and read those really. This foundry sells licenses based on how big your company is, and they basically, if you buy from them, you can just use the font mostly everywhere. Other can be very difficult. It can be like logos, digital points of sale systems, OEM software. That's very restrictive. Like foundries like this will be very restrictive for your project later. You have to be very specific what you want to use it for. I don't think we're going to have too much time on to going into specific licenses, but licenses can be very short. This license by Matthew Broderick is 1 page, and it can be as extensive as 10 pages with very specific restrictions. And sadly, if you see FAQ on a website that explains license, it can vary from the actual legal document that is there behind the license. So you better actually sit down and read it, because otherwise things like this may happen. So stay away from Font Fabric, a very angry user on Reddit. So he's basically explaining that he got an email from Font Fabric, but he bought a typeface, he bought a desktop he bought a web license, and he used it on his website. But actually what he did is he also produced graphics on his computer as well to use on the website, and that's a different license. That's a desktop license. So you have to be aware of those kind of differences. And it gets so complicated that jobs like this exist. This is from Oxford Press. it's opening for a job for a guy who manages this kind of things, who manages licenses, and this is his whole job, and manages the whole Oxford library, font library, basically. Spotify has a job like this, and a few other companies. And yeah, going to the ending. What we learned today, sorry for a bit of speed at the end, but yeah. Why fonts are what they are today. There are more than one kind of fonts, variable fonts and different kinds of formats. And reading licenses isn't scary. Sorry, we didn't go too much into actual licenses. I wanted to show you some proper points inside the licenses. What to look for when choosing a font? At least a little bit I talked about. Latin is not the only script out there. I really want you to get this one point into your heads. If you were to remember one thing, like please do this. And fonts are still often limited by their environment and technology. You can always call a sales department if you're unsure about licensing. They're very happy to help you because this is their profit. And yeah. That's basically it. I had the last slide, but it doesn't want to show up. It was just a thank you slide, so maybe I can show it. Oh, this is on the very, very, very bottom. Thank you. That's okay. Yeah, that's all.
Czy jakieś pytania?
Ja, możecie po polsku, jakby spoko, nie? No.
To ja. No to jak pan z tego da fonta czcionkę,
Aha.
100% free, ona może być trefna?
Tak. Bardzo krótka odpowiedź, tak. Z Dafonta chyba może. Sprawdź, czy ktoś ją gdzieś sprzedaje i przeczytaj licencję. Nie powiedziałem za dużo o Google Fontsach, bo trochę przyspieszałem, ale generalnie nawet jeśli czcionka jest darmowa, to ona może być darmowa w różny sposób. Może być na przykład darmowa w taki sposób, że ktoś ją udostępnił tylko jako trial, albo jako udostępniam ci całą wersję czcionki, ale jeśli ty ją gdzieś użyjesz, to będę cię ścigał, jeśli nie zapłacisz mi. Takie licencje też istnieją. Jedną z rzeczy, które też przestrzegam, mówię, nie zdążyliśmy za dużo o tym powiedzieć, ale jeśli ściągacie czcionkę skądkolwiek, tak naprawdę nawet z Google Fontsów, bardzo często czcionki mają licencje, które nie pozwalają wam je modyfikować. Więc jeśli chcecie na przykład dodać ogonki polskie, sorry, nie ma opcji. Teoretycznie powinniście pójść prosto do projektanta, żeby dodał te ogonki. Jakby nie możecie tego po prostu otworzyć. Wtedy po prostu łamiecie licencję. Także może się tak zdarzyć, nie musi.
Czy formaty czcionek wspierają takie coś, żeby treść licencji była w pliku czcionki? Czy...
Tak i nie. Możesz dodać font info w takie jakby metadata, gdzie masz licencję, natomiast w praktyce wygląda to w taki sposób, że czcionki muszą być bardzo małe, jeśli chodzi o rozmiar pliku, ze względu na to, jak często są używane przez system i przez wiele rzeczy. Jeśli obetniesz kilka linijek kodu w czcionce, którą Google używa na swojej głównej stronie, to zaoszczędzisz kilka serwerowni, tak? Więc w taki sposób myśli się o czcionkach, więc dodawanie całej licencji, która może mieć na przykład 10 stron, to jest wielkie nie. Teoretycznie by się dało, ale w praktyce czasami wewnątrz metadaty ludzie zaliczają tylko link. Także do licencji na przykład. Ale to trzeba dbać o to, żeby przy kupieniu niestety i trzeba pamiętać mniej więcej.
To tak zrobione, że jak czcionka się instaluje, to te metadane mogą być usuwane.
Może? Nie wiem. Pewnie by się dało. Tak. Tak, sorry.
Nie wiem.
Przepraszam.
Rzeczywiste zagrożenie, że ktoś podejrzy, że to jest czcionka, która jest...
Nie, tak. Dobre pytanie. No więc chyba mam otwarte nawet. W tej chwili, znaczy to wiem z doświadczenia, że rzeczywiście każde Type Foundry, od którego takie większe albo średnie, nawet mniejsze czasami, mają swój legal department i oni naprawdę zajmują się głównie tym, że ścigają ludzi. Rzadko to idzie do sądu. Jakby to praktycznie się nie zdarza. Ale bardzo często jest tak, że dostaje się maila na zasadzie zapłaćcie nam, bo na przykład używacie więcej, jest więcej userów na stronie niż podaliście w licencji, albo na przykład widzimy, że wasza organizacja ma w tej chwili 5000 osób, a macie kupioną licencję na jedną osobę. To się zdarza. Są przykłady z rzeczywistości. W jaki sposób to się dzieje? To jest różnie, ale muszę znaleźć, chyba mam tutaj gdzieś w Safari. Jest takie coś jak Font Radar i to jest usługa, która jest targetowana do foundries, do osób, które tworzą czcionki i oni są outsourcem, na zasadzie my wam znajdziemy ludzi, którzy łamią wasze licencje i z automatu i będziemy im wysyłać listy o tym, żebyście przestali łamać nasze licencje. Także to się dzieje nagminnie. To jest szczerze mówiąc bardzo duża część zarobku Type Foundries, że oni właśnie ścigają ludzi i także uważajcie.
Myślę, że dużo łatwiej tak namierzyć kogoś, kto używa na stronie internetowej, a
Tak.
trudniej jak gra jest takim hermetycznie zamkniętym tworem, że jakiś robocik nie znajdzie plików bezpośrednio, co za czcionka jest tam użyta. To ktoś musi ręcznie ją ściągnąć, zobaczyć, porównać, stwierdzić, że rzeczywiście to jest ten.
Niekoniecznie. W sensie nie chcę teraz powiedzieć, kłamać, co się znajduje wewnątrz tego font radaru czy coś w tym rodzaju, ale wiem na przykład, że są technologie, które skrypują web za pomocą tylko patrzenia na obrazki na przykład i zdarza się, że jakby technologia rozpoznawania, jakim czcionka jest na obrazku, jest znacznie starsza niż AI. Znacznie starsza. Także to jest bardzo łatwe teoretycznie.
Ściągnąć, że rzuca się obrazek.
Tak jest. Na przykład na MyFoncie można takie coś znaleźć. Nie pamiętam, jak to się nazywa, ale tak.
Jak Pan opowiadał o historii, tam był taki fragment o TypeScriptie i PostScriptie. A mógł Pan taka nazwa CompuGraphics, CompuGraphics? To coś takiego było kiedyś w historii?
Nie wiem, nie kojarzę.
Czy nie, może...
Dużo dziwnych rzeczy znam z historii fontów, ale tego nie kojarzę. Nie, sorry.
W 70. niektóre systemy operacyjne używały tego.
To była jakaś alternatywa dla PostScriptu albo dla... Jest taka szansa.
Na swoich komputerach.
Okej, już wiem o czym mówisz. Tak, kojarzę. Ale no nie
Taki zestaw czcionek, no nie, to chyba w systemie tylko dwie były, ale nie można było dostać nigdzie, nie było w obiegu w tamtych czasach czcionek w tym formacie.
No, jest dużo formatów czcionek. Na szczęście teraz większość jest zamknięta w tym OTF-ie i to jest łatwe. To dużo ułatwia. To jest bardzo prosty standard. Tak, spoko.
Rozstrzygnijmy to ostatecznie. Mówi się czcionka czy font?
Nie ma różnicy. Okej. Może nie, to się nagrywa, więc to będzie online. To się nagrywa, więc to będzie online, więc to będzie bardzo śmieszne, bo Adam Twardoch, który wydaje mi się, że zaczął tą batalię w ogóle w Polsce na temat mówimy font nie czcionka, w tej chwili już mówi wprost, że to nie ma aż takiego znaczenia i że to jest polski język jest dziwny i nie został do końca jakby to nie zostało nigdy jakby oficjalnie chyba nigdzie skategoryzowane, jakby font to jest angielskie słowo. I tak, więc teoretycznie czcionka jest metalowa, teoretycznie czcionka to jest właśnie tym obiektem, który przenosi ten krój pisma. Font to jest tak, krój pisma. Właściwie font i czcionka to jest to samo, a krój pisma to jest coś innego. Ja bym tak powiedział, ale pewnie jeszcze by się ktoś ze mną pokłócił na ten temat.
Jak ja na egzamin zdawałem, to w sumie u nas mówiono, że właśnie czcionka jest zdefiniowana twardo jako element części starych drukarek, czyli właśnie to, co się ręcznie wykraja, a font jest bardziej potoczny i ma więcej określeń i też jakby określa i też internetowe kształty. No więc tak naprawdę teoretycznie, jeśli się nie chce człowiek błąd prowadzić, to u nas mówiono, żeby mówić zawsze lepiej font, bo to jest bardziej uniwersalne.
Powiem tak, ciężko powiedzieć i wiem, że ludzie, którzy też często dyskutują na te tematy, też czasami popełniają te błędy. Ja bym się nie czepiał słownictwa. Nie czuję się też aż takim specjalistą z języka polskiego. Po angielsku jest to dla mnie prostsze i właśnie dlatego też nie chciałem trochę wchodzić w tę dyskusję. Znam tę dyskusję dobrze, ale jakby ciężko mi powiedzieć jednoznacznie.
Ja mam jedno pytanie. Jak często się zdarza, że robiąc Typeface od zera, takiego projektując za klienta, na koniec wychodzi coś, co jest co podobne do czegoś, co już istnieje i kurde.
Dobre pytanie. To zależy od tego, pamiętasz tą chmurę, którą pokazywałem, gdzie masz to właśnie, że teoretycznie te najbardziej czytelne kroje są zawsze do siebie podobne. I to jest prawda, i tak będzie po prostu. I to nie jest nic złego. One też mają unikatowe rzeczy w sobie, na przykład mogą mieć, zostać zaprojektowane do konkretnej technologii, mogą być nawet tylko zaprojektowane dlatego, że tak wychodzi taniej licencyjnie, to jest też ok. Mogą na przykład wspierać bardzo duży zakres szeroko, jeśli chodzi o wsparcie językowe, wsparcie różnych skryptów i w taki sposób mogą być unikatowe, w naszej łacinie mogą wyglądać tak samo jak wszystko inne, ale na przykład jeśli już odejdziemy trochę dalej od tej chmury i pójdziemy już na taki zupełnie kraniec, gdzie właśnie robimy coś turbo ciekawego, displayowego, no to jeśli nie robimy coś, co jest jakimś standardem typu gotyk czy coś takiego, to można dużo poszaleć i ciężko trochę. Może nie da się, ale ciężko trochę, żeby coś było dokładnie tak samo. Tak ja bym odpowiedział na to pytanie.
Okej, to co, te reszta pytań ewentualnie na Discordzie?
Spoko.
Dziękujemy.
Dziękuję.